Join me as we begin to explore Book 3 of Wraith, the Oblivion, 20th Anniversary Edition. Now we are talking about Wraith, 20th Anniversary Edition, Chapter 10, Spectres. This is Book 3. Book 3 is getting into more, let's say, library functions, a collection of information that you'll need to know, draw on, use from time to time, sources of antagonists and things like that. And Chapter 10 is the beginning of that, the classic Wraith opponent, Spectres, but also a source of a potential way to play an anti-hero in Wraith the Oblivion. But we'll talk about that in a minute. The chapter itself opens up like this.
Spectres are the servants of Oblivion. They creep out of the tempest through nigh hills and lurk in the dark corners of necropoli to seduce and destroy. They serve Oblivion directly by carrying out the commands of their Malfian masters, and indirectly by destroying every soul they can sink their claws into. With each soul lost, so goes the faith, knowledge, and power to keep Oblivion at bay. Spectres strive for the time at which the last great maelstrom will sweep through the underworld, scouring the last vestiges of the realms of the restless until only Oblivion remains.
Those are our introductory words. That's the first paragraph of Chapter 10. It paints a very strong picture in very interesting terms about what spectres are. We have 2 more paragraphs to go through.
But spectres are more than merely a buzzing hive mind of insanity enthralled to Oblivion, also called the Shadow-Eaten. They are reflections of the wraithly condition, beings who embrace their dark urges and who understand that Oblivion is the ultimate fate that awaits us all. And, like wraiths, spectres have unfinished business to take care of before succumbing to the void. Spectres are creatures of unbridled emotion, of dark rage and complex melancholy. They are cold, cruel, and twisted. They exist to inflict their pain upon others and to end their own pain through the extinction of all reality. Along the way, they can also be sadistic, terrifying, sardonic, and even pathetic. But they are never, ever not dangerous.
That's the first page of Chapter 10. Very strong imagery. Doesn't sound like something you'd want in a player character, yet that will actually make up a significant portion of this chapter.
One of the great strengths of these 20th anniversary editions is the ability to bring together information which, from the modern perspective, may have been lost or only exist out there in rare quantities because they were produced in limited runs toward the end of the line, or they are being jealously guarded or hoarded by the people who were able to get them at the time. And one such volume is this. I don't know if you can read it, so let's bring it out. This is Dark Reflections Spectres. Just a slim volume. It was released under the Black Dog Games Factory imprint, and ostensibly was restricted in sale to those 18 and over. I don't know how true that actually was in practice, but I do know that this is a highly sought-after book, and it was very important in my own development of Wraith Chronicles. It came out in 1995, and presenting as it did a very deep look at playing wraiths who have fallen to Oblivion, who, to all intents and purposes, seem like they have gone so far that redemption is impossible. They are actively, consciously, willingly tearing down everything so that nothing remains. This is a very powerful image, and it's difficult at first to consider running these as player characters, to flip the script, to have our dark reflections of wraiths be specters, with the psyche trapped and whispering and trying to get its own way. I'm pleased to see that the material in Wraith 20th Anniversary Edition isn't just a cut and paste of this material. It's an expansion and development of it. And while some of it is simply rewritten in the way that, things get rewritten like homework assignments in junior high with changing words here and there or changing the order of ideas, the material has been reviewed and updated and assembled and expanded. And I think in its current edition, in Wraith 20th Anniversary Edition, we get a clearer look, a clearer message about some of the things that we can do with specters. This isn't carried through consistently, and I have some comments about that which are coming. But when we consider that wraiths are those souls who are desperately clinging to something on the living side of the shroud, who have unfinished business that they need to complete. And then when we consider that that urge exists in the specters as well, so deeply seated that even once consumed by their dark side, they're still clinging to existence. It gives us a palette on which to paint stories of genuine hope, that even though a situation this bleak, heroes this dark, or antagonists this unforgiving, there is somewhere in there the possibility, the slightest spark of redemption. And for those drawn to dark games like this, sometimes that message is extremely important. And for those who haven't yet recognized that downward pull in themselves, this message is extremely important. There is always hope, even in our dark reflections.
Now moving on into the chapter, we open with spectral history, which gives us a specter's eye view on the history provided for us at the beginning of the book, in the setting chapter. Then, and it's quite good. It's enough to make you go, wait a minute, and then want to go back to the setting chapter to double check. So that, I think, is a sign of its effectiveness. Then we get into damned existence. That's just one paragraph about what specters know about themselves. Then we have birth of a specter. How does it actually happen? This is very useful information. And then there are, sidebars on dealing with that in more direct terms rather than the kind of imagery provided in the rest of the open paragraphs. There are systems provided for governing the release of specters into the underworld and that sort of thing. And then we get into specter motivation. Right? And that opens up with members of the hierarchy believe this and specters believe that. So that's a very quick way to get a grip on what we're talking about. Then we get into another section, which is specter tactics. It's good to have this up front because I think this is going to be the most common way we're going to use specters is as adversaries. And there's a whole bunch of very short, direct bits of information about specters do this, and here's some quick systems to make that easy for you. So there's byway robbery, attacking wraiths in the Tempest. There's necropolis infiltration, and there's soul harvesting. And then on page 347, there's a 2/3 page sidebar, both columns, called Arcanoi Dirty Tricks. So it has a list of the Spectre Arcanoi and some cool things that you can do with them. And I really, really like this. This is where a 20th anniversary edition can provide its benefit to players. It's like the players get a lot of experience using the special abilities of their wraiths, but the storyteller much less so. And then when you have to be interesting with the opponents, and you've got so many to draw from, and they have such a variety of powers, And you just simply don't have the time to focus on them like the players do. So having this list of dirty tricks, hey, these are common tactics among specters. I like that a lot. Then we have this section called Specters and Their Kind, which goes through, as you might imagine, all the different types of specters. But it starts out with specter characteristics. What can they actually do, as they are, and I quote, dark reflections of wraiths. So, specter characteristics, they use angst and pathos, but in the reverse of wraiths. Unlike wraiths, who seem to be able to, or seem to be forced to, continue on for vast periods of time, specters are built around having a brief life. They have already been turned. They've already been consumed by the shadow. They're on the way down, but they're going to take some stuff with them, is the idea. It says few specters last more than a decade. They experience ceaseless agony. And it gives you this system. Oblivion's influence is represented in botches. Every time you botch when playing a specter, lose one corpus level permanently, as Oblivion claims yet another portion of your soul. And that seems easy and awesome. And in fact, all the dark arcanoi that the specters have are built around do this when they botch. But if you'll remember, botching in Wraith 20th Anniversary Edition is optional. So this is an area that those who decide not to use botching are going to have to address right off the bat. If they're using specters, how are they going to represent this core element of what they are? A core element of how specters are portrayed in this version of the game is couched under an optional rule. Now, maybe most people are going to use botches anyway. But botches are a lot harder to notice than they used to be. No successes and ones. So, all right. Angst and pathos still exist, as we said. Brief life. Death sight still functions. Dimmed senses. Unlike the heightened senses of wraiths, specters have dimmed senses. This is clear information about exactly what that means, which is then followed by life sight, which gives us the exact same information. Then we have hive mind, tempest affinity, how it is that specters are able to move around in the tempest and during maelstroms without harm. And then, do they or don't they have a psyche? Yes, they do, and here's how to use it. And then this condition of rapacity, their hunger to snuff out and destroy things, and what benefits it might have for them to do that. Then we move into the Dark Arcanoi and what's called Shadecraft. This is our listing of all these special Arcanoi for specters. And it starts out with not dialogue, but prologue. The hive mind and all the different levels of that. And it's in this section, which is our first Arcanoi for the specters. On page 350, down in the bottom, we have a small sidebar which talks about specters and botching. And it says, hey, we know botching is an optional rule, and then it's up to you whether or not to use it. But we think it fits very, very well thematically with specters, so that's why it's everywhere in here. So, All right, so we have prologue, we have contaminate, we have corruption. Some really cool stuff in here for specters to do. More so maybe if they are player characters, but more on that later. We have larceny, and then we move through into maleficence, fun one to say, and shroud rending. Okay. Then tempestos. Right. So I'm just listing these off. There's a whole bunch of different powers that they get into. But you've got a lot of options, primarily to make each specter that you choose to put in a position of prominence in your chronicle different. We have a broad sense of all the different things that they can do. And as kind of like the shock troops of Oblivion, there's a wide variety of of different effects or different tactics that you'll be able to employ because of all these abilities. But what it says to me is that here's a broad palette to choose from when designing those interesting Shadow-Eaten opponents that are going to appear, where you can have discussions with Wraiths about the nature of Oblivion, the nature of the underworld, the nature of transcendence, and you know, the futility of what it is that they're trying to do. So I like having all of these things assembled. Moves into Tempest Weaving, and then that is the last Arcanoi. And then we have Shadecraft, which says, in addition to Dark Arcanoi, Shades have access to uniquely monstrous ability known simply as Shadecraft. A Shade has at least one of these, although it's not unusual for more powerful ones to have as many as 4 or 5. All right? So there's some great names in here like Chameleon Parasite. And you can just imagine what that means. Hound the Harrowed, Imprison, Miasmal Breath, Numb the Heart, Ectoplasmic Tentacles, because, you know, that's useful. Pathos Drain, Rend the Life Web, Shark's Teeth. There's just a ton of really nasty things. Then, done with Shades, done with Spectres, we move into Mortwights. And these are mortals who died with such violence that they became Spectres instantly, never having existed as Wraiths. It's kind of fun. Goes into their different appearances. The next one is Striplings, which are kind of a horrific idea. These are spectral children born from those who died, obviously horribly, before reaching adolescence. And they are a powerful commentary on the state of the world today, and their numbers are growing as we allow our world to slide into wreck and ruin, into, you know, institutionalized hatred and racism and fear. And, you know, rather than teaching people to understand or seek to understand the unknown, we're teaching people to wall it away and to hide and cower and keep like with like and focus on difference rather than how we are the same. And so, you know, we get what we pay for. And that's a strongly worded message in Stripling, between the lines. Then we get into Doppelgangers, a classic Wraith antagonist. And they are what they sound like. And then the horrific Nephrax, right? The twisted things are the result of prolonged exposure to the entropic effects of Oblivion. Warped and devolved, Nephrax cannot hope to pass for Wraiths, not that they would even wish to. Right? Then we have a specific description of Shades, and then the Malfians. And there's a sidebar on storytelling Malfians, which is helpful. Then we have the Neverborn as a subcategory of Malfians, which, you know, is just way over the top nastiness. Then we move into Spectres and the Storyteller. So getting your head around using this main antagonist in your chronicle. That starts out with Spectre as foe, then Spectre as protagonist. The Spectre as protagonist is divided up into mood, right? And they focus in on decay and horror and fear and hate and isolation and madness. Then spectral themes, Spectre chronicle concepts, Spectre story concepts, right? Spectre conflicts, such as Spectre versus Wraith, Spectre versus Spectre, Spectre versus Psyche, and so on and so forth. That brings us to the Spectre characters section, which opens on 370. There is a sidebar, which is very strongly worded, which I think is necessary, but it begins to play the game of, hey, here's this really cool option we know you want, and then they pair it with, don't do it. And I don't know, I tend to feel that that's wasted effort. I feel like saying, we know you'd like to do this. We know it can be disruptive and destructive, and some people can choose this as an option thinking, hey, it's going to be really cool, but then they lack the experience or the sensitivity or the practice or whatever it is that they're lacking to bring their dream to fruition, and it ends up being just the same characters with different powers. And that's not what we want for a game like Wraith. Wraith is actually pushing people to expand their role-playing palette, to expand their abilities as role players. And so I feel like the amount of space that's spent saying but, or don't, or try not to, or avoid, could have been spent talking about what to do. Unlike the guidelines, the very simple, don'ts for how to spend your experience, this is somewhere that needs to coach and guide, right? You want to do this, you want to do something like an anti-hero, you want to do something like a man with no name chronicle in the underworld. Well, try these ideas. That's what I really wanted to see here, and we don't get it. All right, so the character creation section starts on 370, and it continues into creating a Spectre, then all the details, all the exact details for doing it, right down to experience. And that takes us into Psyche creation, because they are dark reflections of Wraiths, as we've said. And we're still going, then how to do Psyche guiding. And finally, on 383, that is the end of things with notes on how Catharsis works in reverse. And that is the end of Chapter 10. Very, very useful, compressed, complete, full. It's a couple of missteps from my point of view about how to handle the role-playing aspects of what they're asking people to do. But it's definitely something that should get the storyteller excited about the depth of feeling and the depth of capability and the variety in antagonists that they're going to be able to bring to bear with this classic villain. So overall, I have positive feelings about this. I'm of two minds about making botch an optional rule to begin with, and then requiring it technically for Spectres. It's an odd way to approach things. But there you have it. One thing that I found particularly useful is that all the Arcanoi, both for Wraiths and for Spectres, have been carefully gone over so that they're using fewer different combinations of abilities and skills to make happen, right? So that you can expect to be rolling the Arcanos itself plus 1 or 2 abilities, which is a vast improvement over how it used to be. There are a couple that don't fit the mold, where they slipped through in editing and proofing, I guess, but it's really not so bad. It's a real step up. It will make playing the game easier, it'll make spending experience points easier, and it will make designing antagonists and NPCs so much faster. But anyway, Chapter 10, exciting.